When you're running a company, it's easy to get stuck in a reactive state where your days become all about putting out fires, solving other people's problems, and dealing with never-ending demands. When you're in that reactive cycle, the problem is it can keep you focusing on short-term challenges where often you don't get the time or bandwidth to focus on what's actually going to move the business forward. Not only that, it's also incredibly stressful where that high stress state can keep you overwhelmed and push you to a point of burnout where you start to feel like your business is a mental and emotional drain. That's why in this video, I'm going to share with you 6 strategies that are going to help you get this under control. So instead of reacting, you can start proactively dealing with the challenges that are thrown your way. If you're new here, my name's Byron Morrison. I'm the author of The Effective CEO, and I help first-time CEOs become the leader their business needs to take it to the next level of success. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future videos. Strategy number 1 is to use proactive planning to anticipate future challenges. With so much on your plate, you probably have days where you wake up and you feel like you're already behind. When this happens, it's easy to convince yourself you just need to dive in and attack the day. The problem with that though is if you just go into the day without much thought about what you're taking on, you're just going to be reacting and bounce around between challenges as they happen to you. This is a huge issue because it means that you can be blindsided or pulled into situations that if you had thought about them in advance, you could have been far more prepared in order to actually handle them. This is why I always advise to clients to take a few minutes every single morning to preempt the day. Look ahead at what you've got coming up and think about, is there anything you can do to prepare for it? For instance, let's say you look at your diary and you see later that day you need to have a difficult conversation. Well, knowing that, you could take a few minutes now to really anticipate what you need to say. Think about what you need to communicate or what expectations you need to put in place. By doing so, you're going to be able to go into it feeling a lot calmer rather than just being driven by emotion and dealing with it in the moment. Or another example could be is, let's say you recognize that later that day you have a big pitch or board meeting. Well, knowing that, you may want to schedule some time in advance where you go for a walk, you get some fresh air, and you get your head in the game so that you can bring your A game when it matters most. Like I said at the beginning, by looking ahead at what you've got coming up, this is going to allow you to feel far more prepared, and you'll also have an easier time handling them as the best version of yourself. Strategy number 2 is ensuring your actions and priorities are in alignment. A couple of years ago, I was working with a CEO who had developed a product, taken it to market, grown a team, and now they were doing 6 figures of revenue a month. While there was amazing growth in a very short time, he now found himself in a situation where he was stuck in the trenches. Every day was just reacting to fires and problems, and there was no real priorities in place for what they needed to do next. This is why I advised him that he had to get out of the weeds. I suggested booking a meeting room where he'd take himself for a morning to plan what he was going to do next. He'd also communicate to the team that he'd be unavailable so he could actually think clearly and really process all the problems that were going on. By doing so, he managed to map out their next 90 days. He figured out what bottlenecks were in the business, what new hires they needed to make, and really got clear on the priorities and where he should be spending his time. By doing so, he was then able to get himself and the team laser focused on what they needed to be doing. And within a few months, they went from doing 6 figures to 7 figures of revenue a month. This is why I really advise at least every 90 days, take some time to reset and recalibrate. Think about, what are your goals? What are your targets? What are the key things you need to move forward? And then to take it a step further, I always advise going into the week, take some time to reverse engineer where you're going. Ask yourself, what needs to happen by 5 p.m. Friday for this week to be a success? What do I need to move forward in order to be one step closer towards our 90-day goals? This is going to allow you to get really clear on your priorities and the tasks that you need to take on. Then every 30 days, take time to reflect on what happened, what worked, what didn't, what you need to do differently, and then set your intentions again. By actually aligning your priorities, you're going to be able to create far more growth. Strategy number 3 is learning to defend your time and getting people to solve their own problems. One of the biggest challenges I see in the clients I work with is their days are constantly derailed by people coming to them with issues. The most frustrating part as well is they often get pulled into tasks that they shouldn't even be involved in. Now, often this is because either they were a founder who was used to doing everything, and because of it, their default mode is just to dive in and figure it out. but also it's because they've created a culture where people know if they dump something on their desk, they'll fix it. So it means they don't have to think for themselves. This is why I want to give you 2 approaches you can use here to start getting this under control. The first is if someone comes to you with a problem, rather than you just taking it on, you've got to push back and empower them to think for themselves. My favorite strategy to use is to say to someone, okay, I need you to go away, research this, think of 3 potential solutions, and then come back to me with your recommendations so that we can discuss it. What this does is it forces someone to actually think for themselves, where they need to look into solutions rather than just dumping a problem on your desk. What you'll find is a lot of the time they'll figure it out by themselves without needing you to give any further input. And in the times you then need to discuss it, you've got all the information so it doesn't take up more of your day. The second part of this is being at peace with solving challenges on your agenda, not on everyone else's. So often I speak to clients whose days get derailed because someone comes to them with an issue and they drop everything they're doing in order to help them fix it. While their intentions may be in the right place, what this means is they're always pulled into short-term problems and they're not getting the time to drive forward the things that they need to get done. This is why I really want to advise you to take some time in the morning, look ahead at your day, figure out, okay, I have these times available, and then if someone comes to you, rather than solving it immediately, say to them, okay, come back at 3 p.m. and we can discuss it then. By doing so, you can start to actually deal with these issues at a time that works for you. Not only that, you'll also find that in a lot of situations when you push back on someone and there's a delay in dealing with it, they'll then have time to process it and they'll figure out what needs to get done. By getting people to solve their own problems and defending your time, this is how you're going to have far more control over your days. Strategy number 4 is to challenge the mental stories that are going on in your head. How often do you worry about something, a problem or a challenge comes up and you build it up in your head as this huge catastrophe, then either it doesn't happen, or if it does, it's nowhere near as bad as you thought it was going to be? Well, one of my favorite quotes is if you stress about something before it happens, you essentially put yourself through it twice. That's why if you want to get this under control, you have to learn to recognize when you're in a story and when you're actually in reality. And the way that you do that is anytime you're focusing on the future or you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed, you have to stop and ask yourself, do I know this for certain, or is this just a story in my head? If it's just a story in my head, what else could be going on? The reason why this works is it forces you to slow down and process the problem. By doing so, it's a lot easier to think clearly and see the situation for what it actually is. You can also then ask yourself, even if it does go wrong, is it really the end of the world you're building it up to be in your head? Because a lot of the time, the answer is going to be no. And this is why if you want to feel more in control, you have to learn to get out of your own head. And you do that by challenging the stories that you're telling yourself. This is how you can start to see situations for what they actually are. And you can start to navigate them as the best version of yourself. Strategy number 5 is to use self-reflection to identify your stresses and triggers. What I found is that because most people are so busy, their focus generally is just on trying to get through the day. They very rarely slow down to think about what happened or the things that they went through. And this is a huge issue because the reality is the experiences that you had, they're your biggest opportunity for growth. They're how you're really going to figure out how to improve for the future. This is why when I'm working with my private clients, I track the entire journey, everything from tough conversations to how they structured their time and the things that threw them off their game. We then take some time every single week to break it down and talk about what they did, what they need to learn, and how they need to improve for the future. The way I always frame it for them is it's a lot like an elite athlete going back and watching old game footage. This is how they improve and get an edge. And that's why if you want to be more effective in your role, you have to treat it in exactly the same way. This is why my advice is to take a few minutes at the end of every day and reflect on all of the things that happened. Go back through the day and think about what caused stress, what was overwhelming, what stopped you from showing up at your best, and then start to think, okay, what do you need to do differently the next time? By keeping this log, you can then start looking for patterns and correlations of repeating problems. For instance, you may see that a big stressor in your life is actually coming from one similar team member. I'll give you an example. There was a client I was working with where when we were monitoring this, he'd recently hired a new CFO, and we realized that he was constantly coming into his office asking questions, which then was derailing his day. Because of that, the simple solution was to push back and say to him, look, keep a log of all these questions and we'll sit down once a day and go through all of them. If we hadn't taken the time to reflect on this though, he would have constantly been reacting and dealing with these issues rather than resolving it. You may also look back on your day as well and see you had endless meetings with no breaks in between that meant you were just on edge and emotionally charged. That may be a sign for the future that you need to put buffers in place or restrict how many meetings you take on each day. Again, if you don't take time to think about this, you're not going to recognize as a problem and you're just going to keep operating the same way. That's why this is one of the most beneficial actions you can take in terms of your development. And in my book, The Effective CEO 2.0, I actually talk about how to do this in detail, and I share the exact reflection tracker that I use with my private clients. So if you want to dive into that further, then you can check that out. Strategy number 6 is probably the most important, and that is developing a CEO mindset that is based in a state of response. We've already spoken about how when you're running a company, it's easy to get stuck in a reactive state where your days are all about putting out fires and solving never-ending problems. The issue with this, as I'm sure you've seen repeatedly, is when you're in that reactive state, there's no way you can make the right decisions or show up at your best. The reality is there's a huge difference though between a reaction and a response. A reaction is impulsive, it's driven by emotion, whereas a response is processed and controlled. This is why when I'm working with my private clients, in our first session, I take them through a mindset training that allows them to start becoming aware of when they're going into that reactive state. Because by doing so, when that happens, rather than reacting, they're able to stop, process problems, understand what's going on, and then choose how they respond to it. This is how they're able to really start to change the way they think and process problems so they can stay calm and grounded regardless of the chaos that's going on around them. Now, going through this mindset training is going to be out of the realm of what I can cover in this video, but if you do want to dive into this further, this is a big part of the reason why I developed the Evolve program, why I help CEOs take control and become more effective in their role. So if you want to become better at navigating the challenges that come with your growth, then you can find out more about working directly with me using the link in the description of this video. So there you have it. Those were 6 strategies that you can use to start proactively dealing with the challenges that are thrown your way. If you have any questions on this, leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I've been Byron Morrison, author of The Effective CEO. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.